the stranger didn't arrive carrying flowers, money or promises. He arrived with dusty boots, tired eyes, and a frightened little girl hiding behind his long coat looking at the woman standing on the porch. He quietly removed his hat and said, "I heard you needed a husband." She almost laughed until the little girl peeked out with tears in her eyes, and whispered 6 heartbreaking words that changed all 3 of their lives forever. Before we uncover what those words were and why the woman lowered the shotgun instead of closing the door, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Every story here is inspired by hope, kindness and second chances. Now let's begin. The wind carried dust across the lonely prairie as another exhausting day came to an end. Sarah Collins wiped the sweat from her forehead and leaned against the porch post of the old farmhouse her late father had left behind. The ranch was barely surviving, the fences needed repairs, 2 horses had gone lame, and another season of poor harvest threatened to take everything she had spent years protecting. Since her father's passing, neighbors had offered advice but very little help. Some suggested she sell the land, others hinted she should marry simply because no woman could run such a ranch alone. Sarah ignored them all. She had learned long ago that depending on anyone often ended in disappointment. That evening she noticed 2 figures walking slowly up the dirt road leading to the farmhouse. One was a tall man wearing a weathered ranch coat, carrying a rolled blanket over one shoulder. Beside him walked a tiny girl with braided hair, clutching a worn wooden box against her chest. Every few steps she slipped behind the man's leg whenever she noticed the farmhouse ahead. Sarah quietly reached for the old shotgun resting beside the front door. Life on the frontier had taught her to be cautious before being kind. The man stopped several feet from the porch, carefully removed his hat, and lowered his eyes. "I heard you needed a husband," he said with surprising honesty. Sarah frowned. "I think you've been given the wrong address. I wasn't promised anything," the man replied calmly. "Only told there was a ranch where hard work mattered more than reputation." His voice carried no arrogance, only exhaustion. "And who told you that?" "An old blacksmith in the next town." Sarah studied him carefully. His boots were worn nearly through, his coat had been repaired several times by hand. Yet, despite looking like a man who had lost nearly everything, he stood with quiet dignity. Then she noticed the little girl. The child had completely disappeared behind him. The rancher gently reached back without turning around. "It's all right, Emma," he whispered. But Emma refused to move. Sarah lowered the shotgun slightly. "She's afraid." The man nodded. "She hasn't trusted strangers since her mother passed." Silence settled between them. Finally Sarah asked, "What's your name?" "Daniel Carter." "And hers?" "My daughter, Emma." Sarah looked from father to daughter again. They weren't begging. They weren't demanding charity. They simply looked like 2 people who had walked far longer than anyone should. "What exactly are you looking for?" Daniel hesitated before answering. "A place where my daughter can sleep without wondering where we'll be tomorrow." Sarah wasn't prepared for that answer. It wasn't work he wanted most, it was stability. Emma slowly peeked around her father's coat. Their eyes met for only a second before she quickly hid again. Sarah noticed something else. The little girl's shoes were far too small. Without thinking, Sarah stepped inside the house and returned carrying a small basket of bread and warm stew. "You both look hungry." Daniel immediately shook his head. "I can work first, you can eat first." He looked genuinely surprised. Emma looked even more surprised. For what seemed like the first time in weeks, the little girl loosened her grip on her father's coat. As they stepped onto the porch, Sarah still wasn't sure whether she'd made the right decision, but something deep inside her heart whispered that sometimes strangers arrived carrying exactly the miracle you never expected. If this opening has already touched your heart, don't forget to like this video and subscribe. The most powerful part of Daniel, Emma, and Sarah's journey is only just beginning. The following morning, Daniel was awake before sunrise repairing broken fences without being asked. By midday, he had mended a leaking barn roof, fixed a stubborn water pump, and calmed a frightened horse that no one else could approach. Sarah watched from a distance. Every task he completed spoke louder than promises ever could. He never complained, never expected praise, and treated the ranch as though it were already his responsibility. Yet one thing never changed. Wherever Daniel went, Emma stayed close, always watching, always ready to hide the moment another person came near. Over the next few days, Sarah noticed the little girl's silence wasn't simple shyness. Emma rarely smiled, spoke only to her father, and woke almost every night from terrible dreams. One evening, Sarah heard soft crying from the small guest room. She gently opened the door and saw Daniel kneeling beside the bed, holding his daughter while whispering, "You're safe now, sweetheart, no one will ever leave you again." Sarah quietly stepped away, her heart growing heavier. The next morning, Emma accidentally dropped her treasured wooden box. When Sarah picked it up, several small keepsakes fell onto the floor. A faded family photograph, a tiny ribbon, and a letter written in a woman's delicate handwriting. Daniel quietly explained that they were the last memories of Emma's mother, who had died from illness during a brutal winter. Since that day, Emma feared losing the only family she had left. She believed that if her father ever disappeared too, she would be completely alone. Sarah's guarded heart began to soften. She realized Daniel hadn't come searching for someone to rescue him. He had come searching for a future where his daughter could finally stop living in fear. That evening, as the three of them shared a simple supper beneath the fading sunset, Emma slowly slid her small chair a little closer to Sarah. It wasn't much, but it was the first tiny step toward becoming something none of them had expected. A family waiting to be healed. Weeks turned into months, and the lonely ranch slowly came back to life. Crops grew stronger, the horses returned to health, and laughter once again echoed across the old homestead. More importantly, Emma no longer hid behind her father's coat. She followed Sarah through the gardens, helped bake fresh bread, and smiled in ways Daniel hadn't seen since his wife was alive. The empty house that had once been filled with silence now carried warmth, hope, and the feeling of home. One quiet evening, Daniel stood beside the porch as the sun disappeared beyond the prairie. Looking at Sarah, he spoke with the same honesty he had shown on the day they first met. "I came here because I heard you needed a husband. The truth is, my daughter and I were the ones who needed a family." Tears filled Sarah's eyes as Emma slipped her small hand into hers and softly whispered, "Can we stay forever?" Sarah knelt, wrapped her arms around the little girl, and smiled through her tears. "Yes," she answered, "you're already home." Not every family begins with love at first sight. Sometimes it begins with a stranger's knock, a frightened little girl hiding behind her father, and one brave woman willing to open her heart instead of closing her door. Together they discovered that the greatest blessings often arrive dressed as life's biggest uncertainties, and that kindness can build a home stronger than any ranch ever could. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who believes in second chances. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next inspiring story.